How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I've got a video covering setting up a save game in Football Manager. I know, that sounds like a really simple task, and to be honest, it's not that difficult, but I want to show you a few little tips to get the most out of your Football Manager save games. I feel like if you're going to start a career and you're going to dedicate, I don't know, hundreds of hours of your life to it, you want it set up to be the best way it can be. Hopefully there's some useful stuff in this video for returning viewers. If you're a new Football Manager player, I guarantee you there is some nuggets of gold in here. And well, without further ado, let's get into this. So first things first, obviously, we have to click the Start a New Game button. And this has got a slightly different look this year, of course. We're covering career mode today, although I guess some of this would also apply to online career. I do want to do a video on fantasy draft in the future. If you'd like to see that, let me know. I feel like it's seen some improvements this year, and I want to show you what it's kind of improved in, because it's really good. And if you're sat thinking, what is fantasy draft mode? That's exactly the point. I need to do a video on it. But no, today we're covering setting up a save game. So let's get into that. First things first, pick a team later. Just always do this. Trust me, there's lots of useful stuff here. And don't click the quick start button. That is cursed. Go to advanced setup and, well, let the game load up the database. So first things first, we can add a manager later, so that is not a problem. Of course, the initial dilemma for any Football Manager save is, what leagues should I load? And obviously, if you're going to manage in England, you're going to need to have England loaded. I think naturally this comes down to a few different factors. So if you're managing in England and you're doing a lower league save where you envisage yourself going to the top of world football, what I'd recommend is loading up England, Scotland and Wales, because in the lower leagues, players between those nations move around semi-frequently. There's some pretty good players there. On top of that, I'm going to select here France, Germany, Italy, Portugal and Spain. And they're kind of the nations that I would load for a lower league England save, of course, alongside England. And then when it comes to actually setting it up, although I don't intend to manage in any of them, I would load up the top flights of all of these nations simply because I want to have it so that their top flights are simming correctly and fully, so that when we play continental football in the future, the teams are more fleshed out. If you don't have these leagues loaded, it's not the end of the world, but basically by having the top flights of the top European leagues loaded, it means that fixtures are actually being played out. The way that Football Manager works is, if you don't have a league loaded, it kind of quick sims matches in the background. So by having these top flights loaded, it means that there's a degree of detail to them that will make continental football that little bit more interesting. Now, of course, besides this, if it was, say, a top flight save and I'm managing as, I don't know, a Premier League club in England, suddenly the lower leagues of Scotland and Wales don't matter so much. In that instance, I would probably load up a similar selection of nations. However, I would choose to load up a few lower leagues down ordinarily. If I was managing in the Premier League, for example, I'd probably choose to have the top two leagues of all the divisions around us. On top of that, there's a bit of a hidden option in Football Manager that people don't really talk about enough, and that is the approximate player count drop down here. Now, of course, you can have it on small, medium or large. It goes without saying, if you're not on the quickest computer, you're going to need to be a little bit brutal with the leagues that you load and the size of the player count that you have. Important things to note about the player count is it's determined by the leagues that you have loaded here. If you're playing on small database size with these leagues loaded, most of the players in these leagues, in fact, I think all the players in these leagues will load. Players outside of those leagues will be far more infrequent. By upping the database size, it's upping the overall number of players outside of the leagues you've loaded, if that makes a little bit of sense. So if you're on an older machine, you may want to load up fewer leagues and also be on a small database size. However, there are a couple of other options that you have. So if you're on a really, really, really slow machine, or you just want to have a load of players loaded, what you might choose to do instead, knowing that, say, you're going to stay in the Premier League managing a top club, is you'd load up the Premier League only or the Championship and above. And then instead of just going to large where we'd have 13,000 players, you can go to advanced. And what this allows you to do is have different loaded options. So what I very often do, I am on a slightly faster machine, is if I'm managing a top kind of European club, I will choose to go to the database size and custom. And then under continents for Europe, I will select players from top clubs, players with continental competition, and players from clubs in continental competitions. Now, suddenly you'll notice that this number has jumped up quite significantly. Previously, it was on, I think, 12,000. It's now on 32,000. And that is because there are now 20,000 players outside of the Premier League that have now been added in. Now, as I mentioned, because the leagues that they're playing in aren't loaded, the game's going to quick sim those fixtures just in the background. So the accuracy of player stats, for example, won't be as good, and the leagues that the players play in won't be as fleshed out. But those players will still exist. So if you're someone who likes to play Football Manager and you want a load of leagues loaded, but you can't afford to have it, this is kind of an alternative. Equally, if we're talking now from the scenario of someone with a good PC like myself, what I would probably do is, if I was doing a Premier League save, is I would load up the leagues that we've just talked about in terms of the top 2 leagues from all these different nations. But then on top of that, I would still go into the custom database size and have these tick boxes selected. Now, of course, you can be a little bit more picky about this. If you're managing in a different continent, you could, of course, switch the continent. Equally, if you're managing in, say, England, there's a few options here, such as having all the players in England loaded, having all the players of nationality England in the world loaded, and this will load up more and more players. Now, the thing to note here is this kind of way of circumventing the number of leagues is great in terms of it forces more players to be loaded in. However, as you get further and further into a save, all the players that are loading in the background have data associated with them. So the further you go, the slower the game will become as a result of us force loading players in here because of the way the game caches player history over a number of seasons. However, if you're not going to be playing a massive number of seasons, it's a pretty good option. Anyway, I realise that's a really comprehensive guide to something that's not that serious. There's all different kinds of user cases, but I'm hoping that in that little rundown there, I've given you a pretty good idea of exactly what these options do and different scenarios you might want to use them in. Of course, below then, we've got all different kinds of advanced options. There's not many of these I would ever use. Use fake players and staff, basically just creates fake versions of players instead of having their real names. There's the option to not use real fixtures inside of licensed leagues, such as the English Football League divisions. Real fixtures are used by default. You have do not add key staff. I would normally leave that ticked if you've got a custom database in a few months' time when they start to be added, or you're managing in like some weird, obscure lower leagues. It might be worth considering adding that one. Similarly, add players to playable teams is pretty useful if you're managing on a lower league database or in a lower league division and your team doesn't have enough players for a squad. That is an option there. Disable first window transfer activity basically means that no transfers will happen inside the first transfer window. It does what it says on the tin. Attribute masking is basically players outside of your own club. You may have gone to their profiles and you don't see all the numbers for their attributes. They may be blank. They may have kind of attribute ranges. By having that disabled, it basically has all the player attributes loaded without any scouting needed. You still won't know stuff like their ability and their potential and their kind of their hidden attributes. But if you're starting out with Football Manager, maybe consider having that one ticked. And of course, the last one here, prevent use of in-game editor. I don't use the in-game editor. You can have it prevented, or you can change it in your FM preferences just to not show the in-game editor. Of course, I don't even think that's available at the time of recording in the beta, so that doesn't really matter. And then on top of that, of course, we've also got the start date. Now, depending on when you plan on playing and how you plan on playing, this will vary slightly. If you want to do loads of transfers in the first transfer window, of course, select the pre-season. If you're someone who wants to go in with the real kind of fixtures and the real squads and you've disabled the first window transfer activity, it may be in your interest to start nearer the start of the season. But anyway, once we hit start game, the game is now going to set up stuff. I've got a few other bits I want to talk about, so I'll join you in just a moment once this is finished loading. Some really useful stuff still coming, so don't go anywhere. Okay, so once we're in game, we've got my manager avatar here. If you're not sure who you want to manage, just to avoid having to go through that entire setup process and waiting on the loading screen, what you can do at this point is save the game without a manager active. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing this all the time because there are certain aspects of Football Manager save games that are determined through the processing we've just done. Some players have potential ability changes, save game to add variants. However, if you're, gonna just look around clubs, want to see what kind of transfer budgets teams have, save the game at this point here. You can just hit save game and it saves. I mean, who would have thought? Anyway, we're going to talk about the manager creation stuff because this is semi-important. For people wondering, when it comes to teams and kind of sorting out attributes, I pretty much always use the suggested experience for the club that I'm managing. I find that the way Football Manager works, if you just want to start with no qualifications but at a top club, the players just don't listen to you and you'll just have all kinds of issues with morale and it gets kind of boring having to deal with player promises and stuff. So generally speaking, go with a suggested level. It'll make your game slightly easier, less headaches, less micromanagement. I find the biggest difference really, it boils down to just players not listening to you. And my least favourite part of Football Manager is just dealing with players. But anyway, let's talk about a coaching attribute. So some of this is kind of obvious, but basically, if you've ever tried to sign a member of staff and you've kind of appointed them a role in training, you'll know that there's like a star rating out of 5. I'll put some footage on screen now so you can see what that looks like. Generally speaking, I will try and figure out an area of training that I want my manager to be good at. So for example, if I want to be a good, attacking technical coach, I will set my coaching staff attributes to have really good attacking, really good technical coaching, and then obviously really good determination, motivation, and level of discipline. They're the 5 aspects that go into being a coach. Now, if you're managing a big club, that's way less important because the team has way more coaches. If you're managing in the lower leagues, fitness coaching is actually a really, really good route to go down. Of course, if we just lower our options slightly and say, we're not such a good manager, you have way less points to deal with. However, I would strongly recommend for lower league saves, putting a fair bit into the fitness coaching, just keeping players fit. It's super useful, especially with players with lower stamina and natural fitness, if you've got packed schedules. Besides that, there's not a whole lot to the coaching of attributes. I feel like mental attributes is where things can get really interesting, especially if you're managing a bigger club, just because you can get really close to maxing some stuff out. And because you have so many other coaches, your own coaching attributes really don't matter as much. So in terms of adaptability, that helps with foreign management, players understanding you, being able to pick up a language quicker, also just getting a job in a foreign league. Determination is all about board requests, so getting your own way. It's very, very nice. That will naturally grow fairly quickly just by doing board requests that are accepted, so maybe consider not maxing that out. Similarly, with player knowledge and youngster knowledge, these will naturally improve over time fairly quickly, so don't feel like they have to be maxed out necessarily. In terms of people management, you can see here, it's basically all to do with training overall and how you interact with players on an individual basis. So all those player talks where players come to you, it's very annoying. It's useful for that. Level of discipline comes down to players coming to you with concerns. Maybe they want a new contract. At the same time, they're less likely to be unhappy if, say, you demote them down to the youth team, or maybe you fine them a week's wages for a poor performance. And last but not least, there is motivating. That is all to do with team talks and the effectiveness of them. It's very, very useful. Anyway, those are the attributes. As I said, at a bigger club, I would lean way more into the mental side of things. If I'm managing lower league, it's all about the coaching. You're not going to have as many members of staff, so being a good coach is usually fairly useful, and especially lower league-wise, I find fitness coaching is the way to go. And of course, once we hit confirm here, we are going to be managing a club. In this case, we're managing Liverpool. Now, if you're sat wondering, Jack, how have you got Liverpool's badge and, well, the kind of kits, the faces and all that stuff, check out on the channel. We've got guides on how to install logo packs and face packs. I will have a video on kit packs very, very soon for you all. Anyway, one final thing I just want to talk about for new players is staff responsibilities. This is something that I always recommend you set up at the start of a save game. To get to that screen, you want to go to staff on the left-hand side, then go to responsibilities and overall. And then here you can basically choose the stuff that you're going to be in control of and the stuff you're not going to be in control of. To be honest, doing it kind of screen by screen here is probably a little bit better. There is no right or wrong way to play Football Manager. If you're a new person starting out, maybe it's worth delegating training to staff members just as you ease yourself into the game. If there's ever an aspect of the game that you feel like you don't really enjoy doing, for example, pre-season friendlies, you can come to responsibilities, match, and then delegate the friendly matches if you don't really feel like going through pre-season in all that much detail. Generally speaking, I don't find myself doing pre-season matches most of the time. But of course, this can be used for all kinds of things, including press conferences, which you can delegate here before you get to news inbox items. And I do think it's a really useful thing just to do at the start of your game, if only for your own peace of mind, I guess. But anyway, guys, that was a little introduction to how I set up my Football Manager save games, providing some useful tips. Hopefully you learned something useful in this video. If you did, smash the like on the video. Check out the other stuff we have going on here on the channel. leave a comment, feed the YouTube algorithm for me. I appreciate the love and support we've had so far with all the FM22 videos. You guys are absolute legends. Hopefully I'll see you again very, very soon. Make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications. There are so many videos coming your way. You're not going to want to miss any of them. And well, until next time, it is me, Jack, and I will talk to you guys in a bit. I'm out.